Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Loving obeisances unto the Supreme Being Vasudeva, who is everything there is. Janmadyasya yato anvayaditaratascha artheshu abhigyaswarat tene brahmahridaya adikavaye muhyanti yat surayah tejo vari mridam yatha vinimayo yatratra sargo mrisha dhamna swena sada nirastakuhakam satyam param dhimahi. We meditate upon the transcendent absolute being from whom springs forth this universe. He is present in all that exists and yet distinct from everything. He is fully conscious and totally independent. He revealed to the first seer Brahma the import of Vedic wisdom. The material creation, made of threefold gunas, appears in him as though real, like water in a mirage. Being eternally self effulgent, he is ever free of the illusion Maya of the material world. We meditate upon him, the Supreme Being. Nigamakalpataror galitam phalam shukamukad drava sanyutam pibata bhagavatam rasamalayam muhuraho rasika bhuvi bhavukaha. O devotees who relish a taste for divine love, Bhagavatam is the fully ripened fruit of the wish-yielding tree of Vedas, flowing as immortal nectar from Shuka Brahma Rishi. Go on drinking the sweet nectar day after day. So now we are entering the 29th chapter of the third Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. In the last chapter, we saw a detailed description of the eightfold process of yoga or Ashtanga yoga in the context of Sankhya and devotion. Now we continue. Mother Devahuti asks Lord Kapila, she says, you have described to me in detail the Sankhya system and the discrimination of Purusha and Prakriti and all the characteristics of Prakriti, the 24 characteristics and all the rest. Now describe to me in great detail the finer points of devotion of Bhakti Yoga. Because Kapila has already mentioned that the essence of Sankhya itself can be realized only through devotion, only through bhakti, and therefore Mother Devahuti asks, please tell me the finer aspects of Bhakti Yoga and also tell me about the various jivas. She says there are different living entities we see, right from the smallest of single-celled entities to fully developed human beings. She says, please tell me the account of all the various types of jivas only in order to develop a distaste for all aspects of experiences. So the whole purpose of her asking this is there are different jivas, different living entities, and each living entity has different qualities, different capabilities, and the human being is at the highest level of capabilities and abilities. And yet every living entity, right from a single cell to the fully developed human, goes only through suffering. So when we recognize the nature of the experience of all the living entities, then we are not having any interest in even living as a heavenly being, because even in the temporary heavens that are there, there is only pleasure for some time followed by suffering. Therefore, all living entities from an ant to Brahma are going through the same cycle of creation and living for some time and then dying at the bodily level. And therefore she says, please tell me about the various living entities so that I can develop a distaste for all living entities' experiences. And finally, please tell me about time, because time is what rules everything and it makes everything come and go. So tell me about time. So hearing these three questions, the first question on the finer aspect of devotion, the second question on the various living entities and their experiences, third question on time, Lord Kapila is very pleased and he addresses his mother. First he speaks about devotion very beautifully, Bhagavan says there are devotion of different types according to the different propensities of men. Various attitudes of men makes devotion to be also manifold according to the diversity of their propensities, of their natural characteristics. But broadly speaking, he says there are three types of devotion, and then there is the highest, which is beyond the three. The three correspond to the three gunas of tamas, rajas, and sattva. So he first says the one who is of the tamasika type, the devotee who is in tamas, in ignorance, he is full of anger, and he sees me as distinct from himself, and he is very violent. He wants to force it on others. He is full of hypocrisy, he is full of jealousy. He he is devoted to me, but seeing me as separate and seeing others as separate, and wanting to impose it on others and use violence and all the rest. So we see this a lot, and this is the tamasika or ignorant type of devotion. Then the Rajasika type is the one who worships me again as distinct from him, but now he is engaged in desire. He is not in violent mode, but he is in the mode of desire, where he wants various objects of senses and fame and power, and he's worshipping me for that. He wants to worship me to get power, to get fame, to get wealth, and all the rest. This is the Rajasika, or the devotee rooted in the mode of passion. Then there is the devotee who is in the mood of sattva, goodness. And this one also sees me as distinct from him, but he is only aimed at eradicating his sinful tendencies. He is neither caught in violence or being very angry and so on in his devotion, nor is he caught in desire and acquiring things, but he is actually in the mode of goodness. He wants to only offer all his actions to the Supreme, and he has a sense of duty, and he wants to be free of sinful activities, but he is still caught in separation, viewing me as separate from him. And then finally, Lord Kapila says, but the highest is the one who sees me as dwelling in the heart of all. He doesn't see any distinction. He sees that I reside in the hearts of all beings, and therefore his devotion to me flows like how Ganga flows towards the ocean. This example was given earlier by Kunti also in her prayers to Krishna. So Lord Kapila says, just as Ganga flows uninterruptedly, or all the rivers, specifically Ganga, flows uninterruptedly towards the ocean in a continuous stream, similarly, the uninterrupted flow of the mind stream of one who is ever seeing me in the hearts of all beings, and he is always with motiveless love. He doesn't need anything. He doesn't even want to be free of any uh, personal qualities or doing good for others. He is simply engaged in unconditional love, and naturally, by that, he does good to others, not with an intention to serve others, to engage in charity, and so on, which is the mode of goodness, sattva, and certainly not to acquire things, which is the mode of passion, or the mode or the with the intent of harming others and being violent towards others, forcing others, which is the mode of ignorance. He is free of all three modes, and yet his very presence is a service to the whole universe, because he radiates unconditional love towards all, because he sees that I am present in all the beings. And he says such a devotee doesn't want anything. There are normally five types of beatitude that are mentioned in the scriptures, and these are called as Salokya, which is to reside in the same realm as God, Vaikuntha; Saarshri, which is to have the same powers as God; Samipya, which is to live near God wherever He is; Sarupya, which is to have a form similar to the Lord; and Sayujya, which is to merge into the Lord. So he says this devotee is not interested in anything. He doesn't want to even live in my realm, live next to me, have my powers, have a form like me, or even merge into me. He is simply happy where he is, serving me. He is unconditionally in the mode of love and service, seeing me in all beings, feeling my presence every moment, everywhere. And therefore, like the Ganga flowing to the ocean, his love towards me is full and complete no matter where he is. So he does not need anything to happen for his love to fructify. He doesn't need to come to Vaikuntha. He doesn't need to get my form. He doesn't need any powers, especially. He doesn't need to be next to me. He doesn't need to merge into me. He is simply happy where he is, and he is able to completely surrender unto me. And this Bhakti Yoga is the highest goal. So, this is what Lord Kapila beautifully describes, same as what Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita too, that bhakti, to simply surrender unto Bhagavan without any expectation, unconditionally, totally, without any motive. This is the highest bhakti. And Lord Kapila says, such is the state of the purest devotee. So, this is what is the essence of Bhagavatam itself, which Lord Kapila brings out. Then he lists a series of various disciplines that are very helpful in having such bhakti, which are already mentioned in the context of yoga as well, but he repeats them because it's important, because bhakti is not a sentiment, but it is unconditional love, and unconditional love requires negating all the false stories we carry within ourselves, all the shadows that are within us, and all the desires we carry. All of these have to be cleansed out, purified for this pure, motiveless devotion to flower. So, for that, he says there are some disciplines, they are performing one's duties in a disinterested spirit. That is to engage in whatever one's duties are without any desire for the result, but just doing it very sincerely, having a daily discipline and having a course of worship, whatever one's way of worship is, whether it's reading scriptures or whether it's listening to glorification through songs or whether it's going to temple or whatever form of discipline one has in one's life, reciting uh, prayers. There are so many ways in which one can have discipline in a daily way in his worship. But it's important that this discipline involves, he says, no destruction of life. So, this is important that one doesn't engage in any violence towards lives, both in terms of the food we eat or in terms of even our words and actions. We are always in the mode of peace, and also not out of any worldly desire, which is also important, that the worship, going to a temple or doing a mantra meditation, if any of these are tainted by desire, that I want this or I want that, and then we are slipping back into the devotion of Rajasika type, as we already saw, a desire based devotion. Instead, devotion that's free of desire and free of violence. Therefore, free of tamas and rajas, and free of sattva too, because by seeing the Lord in everyone and everything and not distinct from one. And therefore, he says, by beholding, touching, adoring, and bowing to me in every form, seeing me in all entities, seeing everyone as my manifestation, and therefore by living in patience, living with dispassion, showing great respect to exalted beings. When someone is senior to us and who is engaged in the sadhana for a long time, who has great experience, showing respect to them, and then showing compassion towards those who are afflicted, those who are in suffering, those who are looking for the way, and behaving in a friendly manner with one's equals. By practicing the yamas and niyamas, the yamas are non-violence, truthfulness, non-covetousness, not coveting anything from anyone, having discipline, that is celibacy, and not grabbing things, not accumulating things beyond need. And the 5 niyamas are purity, being clean outwardly and inwardly, being content, having penance, that is, to engage in a very austere life, study of sacred texts, and being completely devoted to God. And then spiritual, listening to spiritual discourses, chanting divine names. He says, Nama Sankirtanat, that is to sing the Lord's names, and by focus of mind, body, and speech, engaging with satsanga, fellowship of holy men, of noble men, because that is so important to make sure our fellowship, our sangha is with holy men without any egotism. All of these are the supplementary disciplines which are necessary for the pure motiveless devotion to flower in the heart. So if if one is rooted in this pure motiveless devotion, then all these qualities manifest on their own effortlessly. Until that point, it is important to have these qualities and to make sure that one is aware of the opposites rising. Whenever there is any tendency towards violence or tendency towards desiring things, tendency towards impatience, tendency towards seeing others as distinct, when anything rises, it's important to be aware and see that these are coming out of the false sense of division that is taking us away from true devotion, and thereby, through the alert awareness, being free of the dark shadows which are bringing forth such divisions and such uh, negative qualities, and thereby automatically bringing forth the positive qualities that are listed here. One can deepen one's devotion, and the deeper the devotion goes, the more automatic these qualities manifest. So Lord Kapila says, as one deepens his devotion, his mind automatically goes to me, just as a fragrance of a flower is carried by a breeze effortlessly to the senses. Similarly, the devotion of this man reaches me effortlessly, and he sees me as present in all beings. He says, Aham sarveshu bhuteshu bhutatma avastitah sada. I am always and ever situated in the hearts of all beings. And then Lord Kapila then warns that one who doesn't see that, one who is only engaged in outer worship, one who engages in either going to some religious place of worship or having some idea of God as some distinct being, but does not see me as present in all living entities. Lord Kapila says very directly that he actually disrespects me. It is a travesty of worship. He uses a very strong expression for those who pretend to be devout, pretend to be religious, but who are filled with division. So when one makes a show of worship by going to religious places and engaging in religious vows, but does not see the presence of God in all living beings, then such a being is engaged in a travesty of worship, says Lord Kapila. He ignores me and he resorts to only external worship, and therefore he becomes full of pride. And such a being in reality hates me even though he claims to love me, and he therefore develops deep rooted malice to other living creatures, and such a person can never find peace. So, this is so important and so practical for everyone who are caught in outer religious observances without having the inner vision that everything is permeated by the Supreme Being. And this is so prevalent in society in all religions that it is important to be aware of this, and most importantly, in one's own mind, to see if these tendencies are there and to be free of them. Because Lord Kapila says, such worship is a travesty, and he in reality hates me, though he claims to love me, if he does not see me as present in all beings, but only sees me in an isolated place or form, and then has malice towards other beings. Therefore, he says, I am not pleased by such a man who slights other creatures, who disrespects other creatures. If he does not realize me as present in the hearts of all living beings, then his devotion has not matured. And therefore, he also faces fear in the form of death because he is rooted in malice, he is rooted in division, and therefore he is not having the freedom of the vision of sameness, and therefore he is still caught in the bodily platform, and therefore he'll be afflicted by fear and death. And therefore he says one should make all effort to cultivate this vision, the vision of sameness, the vision of oneness, that everyone and everything is my manifestation. And until that happens, one has to be very alert and engage in purifying the mind of all these divisions. And so Lord Kapila instructs that one should worship me by seeing me as abiding in all creatures as their very self, and therefore be in friendly behavior and serving everyone. So this is the highest expression of devotion, is to serve everyone and everything, not serve their desires. This is very important to note too. When we say serve others, it is not to serve their egoic desires, it is not to boost their egoic fears, it is not to serve their sensory pleasure movements, but it is to truly serve them by turning them toward their very source. So, to serve them as manifestation of God, and therefore make them recognize this and engage them too in service of the Supreme, and give them the highest knowledge, give them the ability to see this. It is the truest service, and this service can be offered only when we are rooted in this mode of sameness, which is what Lord Kapila says. And then he answers the next question after this detailed description of devotion given in such beautiful way, very practically, so important for everyone to take all of this because it's so practical, so direct, and yet the highest teaching. After that, regarding living entities, jivas, the question Mother asked, he says living entities, of course, are of different grades. Living entities, first of all, are all superior to inanimate creation because they have some life in them. And among living entities, the animals are superior to other living beings because animals are having some consciousness as opposed to, let's say, plants. And even among animals there is gradation because there are animals which are having sense perception, and therefore compared to single celled animals and ants and so on, there are animals with sense perceptions which are having greater levels of consciousness. And even among sense perception there are different grades. The those which have only sense of touch, and then those which have sense of taste like fish, and then those which have sense of smell like bees and so on, and then those which have sense of sound like snakes, and then those which have sense of eyes like birds. So this is the gradation given, and this is important because while it's important to not harm any living beings, when there is a need, one has to be aware of this gradation, and therefore one cannot be blindly attached to some ideas, but to recognize that everything has its right place. So it's important to not, for example, affect any plants or trees, but if a plant is source of any discomfort to, let's say, a higher order being, then it may be okay to kill that plant with the recognition that it's not ideal but it's important. So there is a gradation similarly, and Therefore, if, for instance, ants are bothering and causing some obstruction to a higher order being, then it may be okay to kill the ants rather than cause disturbance to the higher order being, let's say. So there is a gradation given here. And so it starts, as we said, from plants to animals, and within animals, with those which have sense perception, and within that, first those which have only sense of touch, then those which have sense of taste like fish, then those which have sense of sound like snakes, no, those which have sense of smell like bees, then those which have sense of sound like snakes, and then those which have sense of sight like birds, then those which have teeth, he says, and then among those that have teeth, those which have feet are superior to those which have no feet, and among those which have feet, those which have 4 feet are superior to those which have many feet. For example, the four-legged animals are superior to the eight-legged, so the octopus or many other forms of beings with many feet, and the two-legged human is superior to the four-legged animal. And even among two-legged humans, the one who is devoted to wisdom is the highest, and he is called a brahmana. It is not a caste by birth, but it is a quality. And this brahmana, one who is devoted to wisdom, is the highest. And even among those who are devoted to wisdom, there is a gradation. One who is knowing the meaning of the Vedas is there, but beyond him is one who can clear doubts in philosophy, who understands philosophy, who is having a textual clarity, let's say. Higher than him is one who acts without any motive, one who is acting with a disinterested spirit. He performs his duty correctly, but not having any motive. He is higher. Higher than him is one who surrenders to me completely, and therefore always sees everything in relation to me. And the highest, he says, is the one who sees me in everything, everywhere, offers his mind, offers his body, offers all his actions to me, who has no sense of doership and regards everyone and everything with the same eye. This is what Krishna says in the Gita too, that the highest is the one who sees the same in all entities. So all the gradation that was given is at a relative level, but the highest among this gradation is the one who sees everything as the same. So it's paradoxical to note that there is this gradation, and the gradation leads up from inanimate to plants to animals to all the way up to humans, and among humans to the wise ones, and leading all the way up to the one who is at the very top, who in turn sees everything as the same. He sees that everything is a manifestation of the Supreme Being, and therefore he treats all entities, all living beings with respect, that it is with the understanding, with the vision that it is the Supreme Lord who is the inner controller of all beings. So, this is again how nicely Lord Kapila relates this discourse on the various jivas back to devotion again by saying the highest jiva is the purest devotee in unconditional love. And finally, the question on time was asked by the mother. So he first says that I will tell you about time, but first know that what the Vedanti calls as absolute or Brahman, or the yogi calls as the supreme spirit, is only called as time. So everything that is there, as we already saw in the discrimination between Purusha and Prakriti, it is Purusha who manifests as time. Prakriti has 24 categories, and they are coming into being through the activity of time, which is non different from the Supreme Being. That's why Krishna says in the Gita, Kalosmi Aham, I am time. And so time is verily the Supreme Being Himself, which brings about the transformation of things. And for those who are not surrendered, it is a source of terror. He says this time is a source of terror to those who are identified with matter, with the body, with the mind, and with possessions, and with people, and so on. Because time is the support of all, and it controls everyone from Brahma all the way to the lowest entity. It controls everyone. And even though time is impartial, because time is ticking along for everyone, starting from Brahma to the lowest ant, time is impersonal and impartial, and yet it destroys the ones who are attached to the mode of sensuality. Because if one is attached to sensuality, one is attached to desire, and one is projecting time out of desire, that I want this and I want to become that and I want to get that, then that very idea of projecting time results in time becoming their very enemy, because time will snatch away everything that they are desiring. And therefore, for such a being, time is the greatest enemy, one who is caught in desire. And then Lord Kapila concludes by saying that everything is functioning because of time. It is time that keeps everything in flow, whether it's the wind that blows, the sun that shines, the rain that pours, the trees that grow, the flowers that bloom, the rivers that flow, the ocean that remains in balance, the mountains that are standing straight, the fire that burns. Everything that's there is only an action of time. It is time that makes all this happen perfectly in balance, in harmony. And it is because of time that all of nature is acting perfectly in harmony, in equilibrium. And if one recognizes this time as non different from the Supreme Being, and therefore not attached to the matter, attached to the physical or the mental aspects of nature, Prakriti, then one can become free of time. Otherwise, one is inevitably caught in this web of time, which destroys the physical as well as the mental characteristics inevitably. Everyone perishes at the bodily level, every thought perishes. Therefore, as long as one is caught in body or mind, he is destroyed by time. And therefore, Lord Kapila concludes by saying that this imperishable time is the first creator, even though it's beginningless, and it is the last destroyer, even though it's endless. It is always there, because time remains in its subtle form even upon dissolution, and on the next creation cycle, the same time comes forth and brings forth the next cycle of creation. So, time begins as it were with creation, time ends as it were with dissolution, and yet it being non different from the Lord remains in its seed form upon dissolution, only to wake up again to bring forth the next cycle of creation and dissolution. Therefore, this is the cycle of time, this is the play of time, which is Purusha himself, the Supreme Lord himself, recognizing this and recognizing that everything is under the spell of time and of the nature of destruction except the Supreme Being, and recognizing that that Supreme Being is alone our true nature, and everything else we associate with is only within the spell of time, and therefore of the nature of death. This is the way to freedom. This is the way to recognizing our true self and being free of the fear of time, is what Lord Kapila instructs. Again, how beautifully he brings the discourse on time back to recognition of our true nature, and therefore being devoted to and realizing our true nature as the Supreme Being. With this chapter ends. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.